The weapon no one was supposed to see. The winter of 1944 was the kind of cold that made metal scream. On the edge of a frozen American airfield in France, a ground crew stood silently around a strange wooden crate. No one spoke. No one asked what was inside. Orders were simple. Open it, mount it, and don't talk about it. Inside the crate lay the weapon that would terrify German tank crews more than anything the Allies had dropped on them so far. A weapon so secret that even most P-47 Thunderbolt pilots didn't know it existed until the day it appeared on their wings. A long black tube, a pointed warhead, and a thick instruction sheet stamped with 4 chilling words. Not for distribution, top secret. This was America's new anti-armor miracle, the M8 high-velocity rocket, a weapon designed to shred German armor from angles no tank gun could ever reach. The Germans had their Panthers. They had their Tigers. Their heavy armor had crushed Allied hopes in Italy and France. But now, the skies carried something else. Something faster, something deadlier, something the German tank crews couldn't see coming until their armor peeled open like tin. This is the story the German High Command didn't want anyone to know. The story of how a handful of American fighter pilots flying the rugged, unstoppable P-47 Thunderbolt found a new way to turn German tank divisions into burning metal graveyards. This is the secret rocket weapon that shredded German armor, P-47s over Europe, the problem no one could solve. By mid-1944, Germany's armored forces were bleeding but not broken. The Allies had pushed inland after D-Day, but they were repeatedly stopped by the same nightmare: German heavy tanks. The Tiger I, the Tiger II, the Panther, even the stubborn old Panzer IV. Their armor shrugged off American tank guns. Even the famous Sherman Firefly had to get suicidally close to hit vulnerable spots. Every time the U.S. Army tried to push through a village or open field, one German tank could hold up an entire battalion. American infantry commanders were furious. One of them sent a message that would shape the future of the air war. We cannot advance unless someone cracks these tank formations from above. But the real problem wasn't the tanks. It was the terrain. Normandy's bocage country was a maze of hedgerows. Tanks hid under trees. Panthers lurked behind stone barns. Tigers sat inside ruined factories waiting to ambush anything that moved. The U.S. Army needed a weapon that could hit a tank without seeing it from the front, without risking infantry, without sending Sherman crews into a slaughterhouse. They needed a weapon that could be dropped into any battlefield, at any angle with the punch of a tank gun, but delivered from the sky. The U.S. Air Force already had the platform, the P-47 Thunderbolt. Now they just needed the punch. Enter the Thunderbolt, the German. Soldiers had a name for the P-47, der große Zerstörer, the big destroyer. To infantry on the ground, it was the monster that rode low through the sky, spitting fire from its .850 caliber Browning machine guns. But the Germans also knew something else. The P-47 could take a beating. A direct hit from 20mm cannon fire often wasn't enough to bring it down. Its radial engine drank bullets and still kept running. The Thunderbolt was not elegant. It was not graceful. But it was strong, and strength was exactly what it needed to carry the new weapon. In late summer 1944, a small team of American engineers arrived at a forward airfield carrying the experimental rockets. They didn't salute. They didn't share their names. One of the pilots described them as men who looked like they were from another planet, quiet, serious, and carrying something they didn't want anyone to see. They were from the U.S. Army Ordnance Department, and they had been working on a new idea, an unguided rocket that could punch straight through German armor. It was modeled after British and Soviet designs, but refined with American engineering. The result? The M8 rocket, 4.5 feet long, fast, brutal, and lethal. Its warhead could penetrate steel from angles tank gunners could only dream of. And the P-47 was about to test it in real combat. The briefing that shocked the pilots. On a cold morning, pilots of the 362nd Fighter Group gathered inside a wooden briefing hut. Cigarette smoke curled up to the ceiling. A map of eastern France hung on the front wall. Major Robert Crash Hansen, one of the group's most respected pilots, stood at the front with a look the others had never seen on him before. He tapped the chalkboard. Behind him was a sketch of something mounted under a P-47's wing. A rocket. A pilot raised his hand. "Sir, what is that?" Hansen took a slow breath. "Gentlemen, this is something new. Something the brass wants tested today. Something that might just turn those damn Panthers into scrap metal. Another pilot leaned forward. Does it work? Hansen gave a thin smile. We're about to find out. The pilots were handed sealed envelopes labeled confidential. Inside were instructions. How to attach the rockets. How to fire them. Safe distance for launch. Penetration charts against German armor. The pilot's eyes widened. One murmured, Jesus, this thing can punch through the side armor of a Panther? And Hansen answered simply, yes, if you hit it at the right angle. This changed everything. For the first time in the war, American pilots had a weapon designed specifically to kill German tanks, not damage them, not harass them, but kill them. First mission, baptism by fire. The sky that morning was gray and heavy as the Thunderbolts roared to life. Ground crews watched silently. They knew what was happening was big. History was about to crack open. Each P-47 rolled onto the runway carrying 8 rockets, 4 under each wing, strapped into metal rails that looked almost too small for such deadly weapons. Major Hansen keyed the radio. Thunderbolt Squadron, wheels up. Let's introduce these rockets to the Wehrmacht. They flew east, toward a patch of forest where German forces were believed to be regrouping. Intelligence reports said at least 6 Panther tanks were hiding among trees, waiting for a counterattack. The pilots reached the target area and dropped altitude. The air felt colder, tighter. Below them, the trees parted, and there they were. 6 hulking Panthers, engines idling, their crews unaware that death was coming from above. Hansen lined up his Thunderbolt. He breathed out slowly. All right, let's see what you can do. He fired 2 rockets. They streaked down, trailing smoke, their fins slicing the air with a high-pitched scream. A Panther commander stood up from his turret, staring in confusion. A heartbeat later, impact. The first rocket struck the Panther's side armor. There was no ricochet, no bounce, just a violent flash, followed by a thunderous explosion that ripped the tank open like a tin can. The second rocket smashed into the engine deck of another Panther, sending black smoke spiraling into the sky. The pilots watching from behind were stunned. One voice crackled on the radio. Holy hell! It works. It actually works. Another. Look at that. They're cooking off like firecrackers. The remaining Panthers panicked, trying to move into cover, but it was too late. The Thunderbolts dove again, unleashing 6 more rockets. 3 more Panthers erupted in fire. One tried to flee into the forest. A rocket chased it like a guided arrow and blew the turret clean off. The entire ambush took 46 seconds. 46 seconds to eliminate a German armored unit that an American infantry battalion might have spent hours struggling against. The pilots were ecstatic. The Germans were horrified. America had just introduced a new way of war, one that could turn even the toughest tank into a funeral pyre. German reaction: this is impossible. When German officers inspected the destroyed Panthers the next day, they were shocked. The holes in the armor were too clean, too perfect, like molten steel had been punched inward by an invisible fist. One officer wrote in his report, "These penetrations are not caused by aircraft guns. They appear to be made by a weapon we do not possess." German intelligence scrambled to understand what had happened. Was it a bomb? A new Allied cannon? Some unknown shaped charge? When analysts concluded it was a rocket, the reaction was disbelief. The German High Command had assumed rockets were inaccurate, unreliable, and too slow to kill tanks. They were wrong. The M8 rocket was crude but effective. Its warhead blasted hot metal fragments through armor, spraying the inside of the tank with molten shrapnel. The destruction was so total that even hardened German tank officers admitted privately, "We cannot protect our men from this." And the P-47 had proven the perfect delivery system. Its durability meant it could get low. Its stability meant it could aim. Its 8-gun bursts distracted enemy gunners while the rockets lined up. A new phase of terror had begun for the German armored divisions, how the Germans tried to fight back. The news spread quickly through the German armored divisions. P-47 Thunderbolts were firing something new, something deadly, something that killed Panthers and Tigers in one strike. Tank crews were terrified. For months they had been the kings of the battlefield. American tank crews feared them. Infantry ran at the first sight of their silhouettes. The sound of a Panther's engine had been enough to freeze entire platoons. But now the sky was their enemy. Crews started refusing to stay still for more than a few minutes. Panthers began hiding under thick tree lines, even in daylight. Tiger tanks dug themselves deeper into camouflaged pits. German commanders issued new survival instructions. Never park in open fields. Never move without camouflaged netting. Never keep the turret open. Never assume American fighters cannot see you. And if you hear a jet-like whistle overhead, move, now! But none of it helped. The M8 rocket didn't need a perfect angle. It didn't need a perfect shot. It just needed to hit. And the P-47 pilots were learning fast. By late 1944, they had turned tank killing into an art. The pilot who became a legend. His name was Captain Richard Buzzsaw Myers, a 24-year-old, hot-shot pilot with an attitude that scared even his commanding officers. He flew his Thunderbolt low, too low. Most pilots feared the ground, but Buzzsaw treated it like a dance partner. When the rockets arrived, he was the first to volunteer for every experimental mission. After the first rocket strike on the Panther column, Buzzsaw said, "If this thing can kill a Panther, I'm going to make it kill everything." Within 2 weeks, Buzzsaw had destroyed 14 German armored vehicles, 7 supply trucks, 4 anti-aircraft positions, and a train carrying ammunition, all using the new rockets. His most famous mission happened on a foggy December morning. A German convoy, 2 Panzer V's, 3 half-tracks, and multiple trucks, was retreating along a forest road. American ground observers reported it but couldn't attack. The skies were too gray, visibility too low. The ground was mush. Tanks couldn't move. But Buzzsaw took off anyway. His squadron commander yelled, "You're crazy. You can't even see your own propeller." Buzzsaw answered, "I only need to see the road." He flew barely 150 feet above the ground, following the winding forest highway like a river of asphalt. When he found the convoy, he didn't climb for a perfect angle. He didn't circle for a clean shot. He dipped under the tree line. The tree branches scraped the bottom of his Thunderbolt. His wingman shouted, "Buzzsaw, pull up! You're going to die down there!" But Buzzsaw growled back, "I see my target." He fired 4 rockets in 2 bursts. The rockets lanced forward like spears of smoke, disappearing into the fog, and then the forest exploded. 2 Panzer IVs vanished in flame. A half-track flipped onto its side. A truck carrying ammunition detonated in a massive orange fireball. Buzzsaw punched his fist into the air. "Hell yes! These rockets are beautiful!" From that day on, the Germans feared even the sound of a P-47 engine. Pilots joked, "Buzzsaw doesn't need the sky. He just needs the ground to stay out of his way." Inside the rocket, the science of destruction. To understand why the German tank crews were terrified, you have to understand what made the M8 rocket different. Other rockets used in the war, British RP-3s, Soviet RS-82s, were effective but inconsistent. They needed perfect angles and close range to penetrate armor. But the Americans designed something else. The M8 rocket was simple but brutal. Inside its steel casing was a high-explosive charge built to melt armor, punch through steel, spray the inside of a tank with molten fragments. When it hit, the warhead didn't simply explode, it collapsed inwards, creating a superheated jet of pressure and metal. Anything inside a tank, ammunition, fuel, oxygen, instantly turned into fire. But the real genius was in the velocity. The rocket fired so fast that German tank crews barely had time to react. They heard a whistle, then nothing. Then their tank was on fire. Engineers called it a penetrative blast effect. Pilots called it a tank-killing miracle. Field tests turned into real war. After the first successful missions, High Command gave permission. Use the rockets on every armored target. Priority, Panthers and Tigers. The pilots cheered. Their mission logs began to fill with entries like, "Destroyed 3 Panthers in 1 pass. Rocket impact blew turret clean off. Enemy crew bailed before I fired." Convoys scattered the moment rockets launched. German morale collapsed. Tank commanders begged for anti-air support. Some refused to move during daytime. Others tried driving at night, only to run into American infantry and artillery. The Wehrmacht was trapped. If they moved, P-47s killed them. If they stayed still, ground forces overran them. If they hid under trees, Buzzsaw and his squadron hunted them anyway. One Panther commander wrote in his diary, "We no longer fear the Sherman. We fear the sky." The day 6 Tigers died in 3 minutes. It happened near the Ardennes, the same forests where the Germans were preparing for their last great offensive. An American reconnaissance team spotted a column of 11 Tiger I heavy tanks moving toward a village. These tanks were monsters. 54 Pibergermbalamegun. Thick armor. Terrifying reputation. Normally, it took an army to stop them. But today, something else was waiting. 4 P-47 Thunderbolts armed with rockets. Major Hansen and Buzzsaw led the attack. As they dived from 6,000 feet, the Tigers opened fire. Their 80-team cannons booming so loudly the pilots heard the shock waves even inside their cockpits. Tracer fire streaked up at the Thunderbolts. Hansen shouted, "Stay low, stay fast! Fire and climb!" The first salvo of rockets screamed downward. 3 Tigers vanished in flame. Buzzsaw roared, "Keep hitting them!" He looped around at low altitude, nearly scraping the treetops, and fired 2 more rockets. Another Tiger exploded, its turret thrown into the air like a bottle cap. The remaining German crews were panicking, reversing into ditches, trying to angle their armor upward to deflect rockets. It didn't matter. In just 3 minutes, 6 Tigers were reduced to burning black skeletons. The remaining 5 fled into the trees. They never reached the front line. Allied infantry. Finally, we have angels. Ask any American soldier what they thought of the rocket-armed P-47, and they'll tell you. They saved us. Every damn day. Before the rockets arrived, infantry had to fight Panthers and Tigers with bazookas, mines, Molotovs. Look, none of it worked well. But after rocket Thunderbolts entered combat, infantry units started radioing for them constantly. A typical call sounded like, "We've got armor. Send the jugs." And within minutes the sky cracked open with the sound of radial engines. Soldiers watched in awe as rockets hammered enemy armor with surgical precision. In one battle, a U.S. infantry platoon was pinned by 3 Panthers near a hedgerow. They radioed for help. A single P-47 arrived. 1 pilot. 8 rockets. 3 Panthers destroyed in 30 seconds. A sergeant wrote later, "I swear the pilot winked at us as he flew away." Infantry units began painting Thunderbolts on their helmets as good luck symbols. To them, the P-47 pilots were not just support. They were angels with rockets. And so, as the smoke settled over the broken armor of the Iron Line, one truth became impossible to ignore. The battlefield of Europe had changed forever. What began as a desperate experiment, strapping high-velocity rockets beneath a rugged American fighter, became one of the most feared anti-tank tactics of the entire war. The P-47 was no longer just a thunderbolt in the sky. It had become a hammer, smashing the strongest steel Germany could build. But this was only one chapter. Across the frozen forests, the ruined towns, and the burning roads of Europe, new weapons, new tactics, and new battles were already waiting. The men who flew the P-47 knew the war wasn't done, but they also knew something else. As long as they had their Thunderbolts, as long as they had those deadly secret rockets, the enemy's armor would never sleep safely again. Thank you for watching, Commander. Like the video if you want the next mission. Subscribe to join the squadron. And remember, history is never silent. You just have to listen closely to hear the thunder.